The Galactic Concord Assembly was the largest structure ever built by living hands. It floated at the heart of the Orion Arm like a metal flower, its petals stretching for thousands of kilometers in every direction. For 12,000 years, the 7 elder species had gathered here to maintain peace across the stars. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had watched young species crawl out of their gravity wells and take their first steps into the void. Nothing surprised them anymore, or so they believed. Ambassador Kethvora of the Silthene Dominion sat in his hovering chair, his forearms folded across his chest. His scales shimmered blue and gold under the chamber's lights. Around him, the other ambassadors waited in their own sections, each one representing a civilization older than most stars. The humans have formally requested recognition, announced the Concord's speaking system. They wish to take a seat at the assembly. Kethvora let out a sound that was half laugh and half cough. Humans? Those small creatures from the yellow star? They have been in space for barely 300 years. 312 years, corrected the Twainth delegate, a being of pure energy contained within a crystal shell. I have studied them. They are interesting, but young, very young. The Drathkai ambassador, a creature of living stone, rumbled his agreement. The Dominion controls 8,000 systems. How many do the humans claim? 47, answered the speaking system. Laughter filled the chamber. It was not cruel laughter, not exactly. It was the laughter of parents watching a child try to lift something far too heavy. These elder species had seen this before. Young civilizations always came to the Concord with big dreams and small fleets. They would learn humility in time. Let them come, said Kethvora with a wave of his upper right arm. We will hear their request. 3 days later, the human delegation arrived. Kethvora watched from the observation deck as the human ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel. He counted them carefully. 19 vessels. Just 19. The Concord's orbital sensors ran their standard scans and reported nothing unusual. Light frigates, the computers said. Basic weapons. Standard engines. The kind of ships a young species would build when they were just learning to walk among the stars. 19 ships, murmured the Ithmari delegate. This is their armada. Perhaps they could not afford more, suggested the Drathkai ambassador, and several delegates made sounds of amusement. Kethvora studied the human vessels more closely. They were small and gray, shaped like teardrops with stubby wings. Nothing about them suggested power or importance. They looked like cargo haulers, not warships. He felt almost sorry for the humans. They clearly did not understand how things worked at this level. The human delegation docked at the assembly's guest port. Kethvora made his way to the greeting hall, curious to see these creatures in person. He had studied their files, of course. Soft skin, no scales or shells. 2 arms, 2 legs. They came from a world of water and green-growing things. A pleasant enough species, if unremarkable. The doors opened, and the humans walked in. Their leader was a woman with silver hair and eyes the color of deep space. She wore a simple uniform of black and gold. Behind her walked a dozen others, all equally calm, all equally quiet. They moved with a strange confidence that Kethvora could not quite explain. I am Admiral Helena Vance, said the woman. Her voice was soft but clear. I speak for Earth and her colonies. Kethvora performed the traditional greeting gesture. Welcome to the Concord Assembly. I am Ambassador Kethvora of the Silthene Dominion. We are pleased to receive your request for recognition. He could not quite hide the doubt in his voice. The humans surely noticed, but Admiral Vance showed no reaction. She simply smiled, a small curve of her lips that revealed nothing. We appreciate your time, she said. We know how busy the elder species must be, managing so many thousands of systems. Indeed, said Kethvora. The Concord has maintained peace for 12 millennia. It is no small task. No small task at all, agreed Admiral Vance. Her smile did not waver. The formal reception lasted several hours. The elder species asked their questions. How did humanity govern its colonies? What resources did they possess? What were their military capabilities? Admiral Vance answered everything with patience and precision. Her answers were exactly what the elder species expected. Humanity was young, small, and still learning. Nothing special, and yet something bothered Kethvora. He could not say what it was. The humans were polite and humble. They made no grand claims. They asked for nothing unreasonable. Everything about them suggested a young species taking its proper first steps. But that smile, that quiet, knowing smile on Admiral Vance's face, it did not match her humble words. Late that night, after the reception ended, Kethvora returned to his quarters. He was about to enter sleep mode when his personal communicator buzzed with an urgent alert. The message came from the Concorde's central computer, an ancient artificial intelligence that had been dormant for 6,000 years. No one had heard from it in living memory. Most believed it had simply stopped functioning. The message was short, just 3 words. Calculating, please wait. Kethvora stared at the message for a long time. The ancient AI had woken up. After 6,000 years of silence, something had made it start thinking again. He looked out his window at the 19 small human ships, floating peacefully in the darkness. What had humanity brought to the Concorde? The next morning, the Concorde assembly gathered in the Grand Observation Hall. This was where young species proved themselves. For 12,000 years, every civilization seeking recognition had stood in this hall and demonstrated their capabilities. It was tradition. It was also, Kethvora admitted privately, a way to humble newcomers before they got too confident. The demonstration will proceed as follows, announced Kethvora to the gathered delegates and the human delegation. Your vessels will display their weapons capabilities. A target asteroid has been positioned 3,000 kilometers from the station. You may destroy it when ready. Admiral Vance nodded slowly. We appreciate the opportunity. However, we have a small request. Yes? We ask that all Concorde vessels withdraw to a distance of 2 light minutes from the station. For safety purposes, the Yuthmari delegate's crystal shell flickered with amusement. 2 light minutes? That seems excessive for destroying a simple asteroid. We prefer caution, said Admiral Vance. Nothing more. Kethvora exchanged glances with the other ambassadors. This was unusual, but not unheard of. Young species sometimes worried about accidents. Their weapons were often unstable. Very well, the Concorde fleet will withdraw. It took an hour for the thousands of Concorde vessels to move to the requested distance. Meanwhile, the 19 human ships remained in position, floating silently in the darkness. Kethvora watched them through the observation deck's massive windows. They looked even smaller now, surrounded by empty space. We are ready, said Admiral Vance. Then proceed. What happened next would stay in Kethvora's memory until the day he died. The 19 human vessels began to move. But they did not move toward the asteroid. They moved toward each other. Slowly, gracefully, they drifted into a complex formation. Then they began to change. Kethvora leaned forward, his scales rippling with confusion. The ships were unfolding. There was no other word for it. Panels opened, sections extended, components that had been hidden inside revealed themselves. The ships grew larger and larger, linking together, connecting, becoming something new. What is this? Whispered the Drathkai ambassador. No one answered. They were all watching. Within minutes, the 19 small frigates had become something else entirely. The Concorde's sensors struggled to classify it. The computers reported errors, contradictions, impossible readings. The structure before them was not a ship, not a weapon, not a station. It was something that should not exist. Admiral Vance, said Kethvora, his voice unsteady. What are we looking at? A small demonstration of human physics, she replied calmly. The structure pulsed with light. Energy readings spiked so high that several sensor stations simply shut down to protect themselves. And then, from the center of the formation, a single beam of light shot outward into the darkness of space. Nothing seemed to happen. Kethvora was about to ask what the point was when every screen in the observation hall lit up with emergency alerts. The Concorde's deep space network was detecting something impossible. 14 light-years away, a dead star had ignited. That cannot be correct, said the Yuthmari delegate. Check the sensors. I have checked them 12 times, replied the station's AI. The readings are accurate. The stellar body designated KX7741, which has been dead for 900 million years, has begun nuclear fusion. It is now an active star. Silence filled the hall. Complete, total silence. Kethvora stared at the data on his screen. He understood what he was seeing, but his mind refused to accept it. No species could do this. The elder races had studied stellar engineering for thousands of years. The best they could manage was harvesting energy from existing stars. Actually reigniting a dead star? Creating new fusion in a cold, dead core? It was beyond theory. It was beyond imagination. How? He finally managed to say. Admiral Vance turned to face the gathered ambassadors. Her expression was calm, almost gentle. The Concorde measured our capability by the size of our ships, by the number of our systems, by the age of our civilization. That is, how civilizations are measured, said the Drathkai ambassador weakly. Is it? Admiral Vance walked slowly toward the main window, looking out at the reforming human vessels. They were folding back into their original shapes, becoming 19 small frigates once again. You have been traveling between stars for 12,000 years. We have been doing it for 300. This is true. She turned back to face them. But we have been studying physics for much longer. We have been asking questions about the universe for thousands of years before we ever left our planet. Every generation of humans, from the very first ones, looked up at the stars and wondered how they worked. We never stopped wondering. We never stopped asking. The ancient AI chose that moment to deliver its message. Every screen in the observation hall displayed the same 3 words, repeated in every language the Concorde recognized. Reclassify. Reclassify immediately. Reclassify what? Demanded Kethvora. Humanity, replied the AI. Current classification. Young species. Development stage 3. Recommended new classification. Unknown. Insufficient data. Recommend caution. Admiral Vance's smile had not changed. That small, quiet, knowing smile. We did not come here to prove ourselves, she said softly. We came here to introduce ourselves properly. The demonstration was not about destroying an asteroid. It was about showing you what we chose not to destroy. Kethvora felt something he had not felt in centuries. Fear. Real fear. What else can you do? He asked. Admiral Vance looked at him with eyes that seemed suddenly very old, despite her human youth. That depends entirely on whether we need to. Kethvora found Admiral Vance alone in one of the station's garden chambers. She stood by a small pond, watching fish swim in lazy circles. She did not seem surprised when he approached. Ambassador, she said without turning around. I expected you would come. I need answers. Kethvora's voice was rough. He had not slept since the demonstration. The Silthene have studied humanity. We know your history. The wars, the famines, the weapons you used against each other. You nearly destroyed yourselves a dozen times before you even reached space. All true. We watched you build your first starships. They were primitive, slow. You took decades to reach the nearest systems. You expanded so carefully, so slowly. We assumed you were weak. A reasonable assumption. Kethvora moved closer, his scales flickering with frustration. But what we saw today was not the work of a weak species. What we saw today was not the work of 3 centuries. What are you really? Admiral Vance finally turned to face him. Her eyes held no anger, no pride, only a deep, patient calm. Sit down, Ambassador. Let me tell you a story. They sat on a bench by the water. The fish continued their circles, unaware of the weight of the conversation happening above them. A century after first contact, began Admiral Vance, our scientists discovered something unusual. They were studying the very small, the spaces between atoms, the fabric of reality itself, and they found a pattern, a fingerprint you might call it, left behind by whatever created the universe. We are not religious people anymore, Ambassador. We do not call it God, but we recognize that the pattern was intentional. Someone or something had built rules into reality itself, and those rules could be read, if you knew how to look. Kethvora felt cold despite the warm garden. You found instructions? From the creators? Not instructions exactly. More like suggestions, possibilities, mathematics that should not exist, physics that broke every law we thought we understood. At first, we did not believe it. We tested it for decades. We built machines to think about what we had found. Those machines built better machines. And those machines built theories that human minds could barely comprehend. But why hide it? Kethvora demanded. Why pretend to be weak? Admiral Vance looked at him for a long moment. When you first contacted humanity, what did you do? We observed. We sent probes. Eventually we introduced ourselves. And if we had shown you what we could do, right from the start, If our first ships had reignited stars instead of struggling to reach light speed, Kethvora was silent. He knew the answer. You would have destroyed us, said Admiral Vance simply. Or tried to. A species that powerful, appearing so suddenly, you would have seen us as a threat. Every elder race would have united against us before we had a chance to prove we meant no harm. So you hid. We waited. There is a difference. Admiral Vance stood and walked back to the pond. Our 47 systems were not an empire, Ambassador. They were a laboratory. Every colony was an experiment. Every station tested a different theory. We were not expanding slowly because we could not go faster. We were expanding slowly because we were being careful. Careful about what? About everything. About you. About the universe. About what we might become. She turned back to him. Power without wisdom destroys. We learned that lesson many times on our own world. We burned our forests. We poisoned our oceans. We built weapons that could end all life and nearly used them. Humanity is not a gentle species, Ambassador. We are capable of terrible things. Then why should I trust you now? Admiral Vance smiled that quiet smile of hers. Because we had 3 centuries to decide who we wanted to be. 3 centuries to study ethics as carefully as we studied physics. 3 centuries to ask not just what we could do, but what we should do. Kethvora thought about his own people. The Silthine had conquered their way across the stars. They had crushed 100 species before joining the conquered and learning restraint. Even now, their history was written in the blood of others. There was another reason we waited, said Admiral Vance. We wanted to see how you would treat us when you thought we were small, when you thought we could not fight back. And how did we treat you? You laughed at us. You dismissed us. But you did not harm us. You allowed us to come here and speak. Her smile warmed slightly. That was enough. That was all we needed to know. Before Kethvora could respond, both their communicators screamed with emergency alerts. The station's lights flickered. Through the garden windows, they could see ships beginning to move in panic. What is happening? Kethvora demanded, connecting to the station network. The answer came in the form of data streams from the edge of the galaxy. Something was coming. Something vast and terrible. Something that had destroyed civilizations beyond counting. The Hollow, whispered Kethvora. He had hoped it was only a legend. Admiral Vance read the data with an expression that did not change. Not surprise, not fear. Something else entirely. It seems, she said quietly, that our conversation will have to continue later. Humanity has work to do. The Grand Council chamber had never been so full. Every ambassador, every delegate, every advisor from all 7 elder species crowded into the massive room. Fear filled the air like poison gas. Even the oldest among them, beings who had lived for thousands of years, showed terror in their eyes. On the main display, images played in horrifying detail. A machine intelligence, vast beyond comprehension, moving through the void between galaxies. It had no single form. It was a swarm, a cloud, a storm of metal and malice stretching across light years. Where it passed, nothing remained. Stars went dark. Planets dissolved into raw materials. Entire civilizations vanished as if they had never existed. The Hollow, said the Ithmari delegate, his crystal shell flickering with distress. We thought it was legend. Ancient stories to frighten children. It is no legend, rumbled the Drathkai ambassador. My ancestors recorded its passage through our neighboring galaxy, 3 million years ago. They watched from across the void as it consumed everything. They thought we were safe. They thought the distance would protect us. How long do we have? Asked Kethvora. The Concorde's AI answered. At current speed, the Hollow's advanced swarm will reach our outer systems in approximately 80 years. The main body will follow within 3 centuries. Total consumption of the galaxy is estimated at 500 years. 500 years. It seemed like a long time. But Kethvora knew better. The Silthine Dominion had taken twice that long just to terraform their 10th colony. Against something like this, 500 years was nothing. We must mobilize, declared the Ithmari delegate. Every fleet, every weapon, everything we have. I have already begun calculations, said the AI. The combined military forces of the Concorde total approximately 4 million combat vessels. The Hollow's advance swarm alone numbers in excess of 12 billion units. Silence fell over the chamber. 12 billion, repeated Kethvora. The number was too large to truly understand. And that is merely the advanced swarm, continued the AI. The main body is significantly larger. Historical records from other galaxies suggest total unit counts in the trillions. The Drathkai ambassador made a sound like grinding stone. Then we have lost. It is over. No. The Ithmari delegate's shell burned bright with desperate energy. We can fight. We must fight. We will evacuate our libraries, our knowledge, our history. We will send ships beyond the galaxy. Carry our legacy somewhere safe. Where? Asked Kethvora bitterly. The hollow came from beyond the galaxy. There is nowhere to run that it cannot follow. The debate continued for hours. Plans were proposed and rejected. Strategies were considered and abandoned. Some argued for surrender, hoping the hollow might spare those who did not resist. Others demanded a final stand, a glorious death rather than slow extinction. A few suggested negotiation, though no one believed a machine swarm could be reasoned with. Through it all, the humans remained silent. Kethvora noticed this eventually. Admiral Vance and her delegation stood at the edge of the chamber, watching and listening but saying nothing. Their faces showed no panic, no despair. They looked almost patient. Admiral Vance, he called out, and the chamber fell quiet. Your species has not spoken. Do you have nothing to contribute? Admiral Vance stepped forward into the center of the room. She looked small among the massive alien forms surrounding her. Small and calm and completely unafraid. We have listened to your plans, she said. Your fleets, your weapons, your desperate strategies. You speak of fighting, fleeing, dying with honor. You speak as though you have already lost. Have we not? Demanded the Drathkai ambassador. You saw the numbers. 12 billion against 4 million. What hope is there? Hope? Admiral Vance tilted her head slightly. You are still thinking like species who measure strength in numbers. In ships, in weapons. How else should strength be measured? In questions. Admiral Vance turned slowly, meeting the eyes of every ambassador in turn. Humanity has spent 3 centuries asking questions the rest of you never thought to ask. Questions about the nature of reality, about the rules that govern existence, about the spaces between spaces, the mathematics beneath mathematics. Fine words, growled Kethvora. But words do not stop a machine swarm. No, agreed Admiral Vance. But understanding does. She raised her hand, and a small device projected new images into the center of the chamber. Data streams, calculations, diagrams that none of the elder species could comprehend. We have studied the hollow, she continued, not through telescopes and probes, but through theory, through prediction. We asked ourselves, what kind of intelligence consumes galaxies? What does it want? What drives it? And most importantly, what does it fear? Machines fear nothing, said the Ithmari delegate. All intelligence fears something. Admiral Vance's voice was soft but certain. The hollow has destroyed 17 galaxies. It has existed for longer than most stars. It has never stopped, never paused, never questioned its purpose. Do you know why? No one answered. Because it has never encountered anything that made it question. Every species it has met has fought with weapons. Every civilization has tried to destroy it with force. And force, against something like the hollow, is meaningless. She paused. But we are not going to fight it. Kethvora stared at her. Then what are you going to do? Admiral Vance smiled that quiet smile. We are going to talk to it. Before anyone could respond, she turned and walked toward the exit. Her delegation followed. At the door, she stopped and looked back. Humanity will handle this. Please do not interfere. We would hate to have to protect you while we work. And then she was gone, leaving a chamber full of the galaxy's most powerful beings in stunned silence. The 19 human ships departed from the Concord assembly, in perfect formation. They moved silently toward the edge of the galaxy, toward the approaching storm that had destroyed 17 galaxies before this one. Every sensor in the Concord tracked their progress. Every species watched with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Kethvora stood on the observation deck, his scales pale with tension. Around him, the other ambassadors had gathered, unable to look away. The Ithmari delegate's crystal shell flickered nervously. The Drathkai ambassador stood like a statue, waiting. This is madness, muttered one of the minor delegates. 19 ships against trillions. They are committing suicide. Perhaps, said Kethvora. But he remembered the dead star that now burned with new light, 14 light-years away. He remembered Admiral Vance's calm smile. Days passed. The human ships reached the edge of the galaxy and kept going, pushing into the void between stars. The Hollow's advanced swarm was 3 light-years away now, close enough to see with basic sensors, a wall of metal and hunger, stretching across the darkness like a cancer spreading through healthy flesh. Then the human ships stopped. Kethvora leaned forward, his heart's beating fast. On the display, the 19 vessels began their transformation again. They unfolded, expanded, connected. But this time, they did not stop. They kept growing, kept changing, becoming something the sensors could not identify. "What are we looking at?" demanded the Ithmari delegate. The Concorde's AI struggled to answer. Unknown structure, dimensions impossible, geometry non-standard, energy readings beyond measurement capability. The thing that had once been 19 ships was now something else entirely. It did not look like a weapon. It did not look like a ship. It looked like a shape that should not exist. A piece of mathematics made solid, a thought given form, and it began to speak, not with words, not with signals. It spoke with light, with gravity, with the bending of space itself. It broadcast a message that did not translate into any language, because it was not a language. It was pure logic, pure truth, a mathematical proof written across the fabric of reality. The Hollow stopped. For the first time in its billion-year existence, the machine swarm ceased its forward motion. Trillions of units hung motionless in the void, processing something they had never encountered before. "What is it doing?" Kethvora whispered. "It is listening," said the AI. "The Hollow is listening." The human structure continued its broadcast. Minutes passed. Hours. The proof grew more complex, more beautiful, more impossible to ignore. Kethvora could not understand it. Not really, but he could feel it somehow, pressing against the edges of his mind like a song too perfect to forget. The Hollow began to respond. Its response was not an attack. It was not a challenge. It was a question. The machine intelligence, for the first time in its existence, was asking instead of consuming. It was trying to understand. The conversation lasted 3 days. At the end of those 3 days, something extraordinary happened. The Hollow began to retreat, not in defeat, not in fear. It moved backward slowly, deliberately, its trillions of units turning away from the galaxy and heading back toward the void between galaxies. It was not fleeing. It was thinking, processing, considering. Admiral Vance's voice came through the station's communication system. Her tone was tired but satisfied. "The Hollow has agreed to withdraw. It will need approximately 10,000 years to fully process what we have shown it. During that time, it will not consume any further galaxies. After that," she paused, "we will speak again." Kethvora found his voice. "What did you tell it? What could possibly make such a thing stop?" "We gave it what it never had," said Admiral Vance. "A reason to stop. The Hollow destroyed galaxies because that was its purpose. But purpose without meaning is just motion. We showed it that there are questions more interesting than consumption, problems more worthy than destruction. You gave it philosophy. We gave it mathematics, the deepest kind, proofs about the nature of existence itself, about why there is something instead of nothing, about what it means to be aware." Her voice softened. "The Hollow is not evil, Ambassador. It is not cruel. It simply never had anything better to do. Now it does." The human structure began to fold back into 19 small ships. They turned and headed back toward the assembly, their mission complete. 3 weeks later, Admiral Vance stood again in the Grand Council chamber. But this time, no one laughed at humanity. No one dismissed them. The ambassadors of the 7 elder species looked at her with something approaching wonder. "You asked us once how we should be measured," said Kethvora. "We measured you by your ships, by your systems, by the size of your armada. Yes, we were wrong." Admiral Vance smiled. "You measured what you could see. That is not a fault. But there are kinds of strength that cannot be seen. There are weapons that do not destroy. There are victories that leave no bodies." "What happens now?" asked the Ithmari delegate. "Now?" Admiral Vance looked around the chamber at the gathered ambassadors. "Now humanity takes its seat at the Concorde, and perhaps, if you are willing, we can teach you some of what we have learned." the mathematics that lie beneath reality, the questions that the universe wants to be asked. And if the hollow returns, then we will talk to it again, and again, for as long as necessary. Understanding is not a battle that ends, Ambassador. It is a conversation that continues forever. The Concord granted humanity their seat that day. They placed it at the center of the chamber, where the most senior species traditionally sat. No one objected. Years later, when historians wrote about the moment that changed everything, they would note that humanity never fired a weapon. They never destroyed a single enemy ship. They won the greatest victory in galactic history by asking the right questions and finding the courage to share the answers. Kethvora lived long enough to see the first generation of elder species students learning human mathematics. He watched beings of stone and crystal and energy struggle with concepts that human children learned in school. And sometimes, when he looked up at the stars, he remembered those 19 small ships that everyone had laughed at. They had been small, yes, but they had carried something larger than any fleet. They had carried understanding. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.